Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it's my number 18 team in my 2026 Deep Dive series, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, this is a team that was in a tremendous amount of turnover. For the first time in a decade and a half, they have a brand new head coach. Mike Tomlin is gone. One of the most surefire head coaches, Mike Tomlin, gone. In his place, Mike McCarthy. One of the most controversial head coaching decisions that we've seen. You know, one thing, people argue Mike McCarthy wins. Other people argue, well, Mike Tomlin never had a losing season and he had that defense performing well. It was an interesting offseason for this team to make this transition. They don't change head coaches lightly, so we'll leave it at that. From a roster standpoint, Aaron Rodgers back at quarterback. Huge reason probably why he came back is Mike McCarthy in that relationship. They do have great chemistry, so something could be brewing from an offensive perspective. It's just not a long-term solution, obviously, with Aaron Rodgers north of 40 years old. They added to the running game with Rico Dowdle. They added to the passing game. They really invested in making Mike McCarthy's system work by adding Michael Pittman Jr. and drafting Jeremy Bernard out of Alabama to pair up triplet-wise with DK Metcalf. They got the absolute physical anomaly, Darnell Washington at tight end, who Aaron Rodgers really loved, including Jalen Warren as well. We'll see how those wide receivers get worked into this offense now with the Mike McCarthy system. Rico Dowdle is now at the running back position, going to mix in with Jalen Warren, a different type of running back style. They drafted Max Iannacore from Arizona State for the offensive line. That offensive line is going to be one of some question marks that we'll get to throughout the player evaluation. But one position group is the opposite side, the defensive line, which is phenomenal. We'll get to how highly I think of them. Really got 4 superstar players, no matter what you think about the regression of TJ Watt. Still a star. They got 4 legit guys there, at least, including some really good interior defensive line depth that we'll talk about as well. The linebackers are a little bit, I think a little overrated by people, but we'll get to that as well. And then there's the defensive backs, which I think are so complete. Adding Jamel Dean to that group with Joey Porter Jr. coming off a career year. Jalen Ramsey getting converted to safety. Had a little bit of a rough year in that conversion, but I think he'll settle in really nice in that safety / nickel back role that he's going to have in this defense, led by Patrick Graham, of course. And then they added Jaquan Brisker as well into that secondary. They drafted Dalen Everett. Brandon Ickles returns as well to be a versatile piece. And quietly last season, they added and retained in this last offseason Asante Samuel Jr. We'll talk about that a little bit as well. But we really got to start here with the biggest change, and that's the culture change, and that's the coaching staff change. Mike McCarthy is my 25th ranked head coach. Now this is a really interesting hire, because if we were to look at the history of Pittsburgh, which is very well documented, Mike McCarthy's only their 4th head coach since like the late 60s, I think, whenever Chuck Noll got hired. So they don't hire coaches with short-term goals, as it's just not the Steeler way of doing things. So Mike McCarthy is very much hired as a long-term culture shifter, roster redevelopment, etc., etc. The same way it was with Cowher when Chuck Noll was moved on from. Same way it was with Tomlin for Cowher. And it's really interesting that they made this decision, because if it was Mike Tomlin still here as the head coach, he'd be hovering right around the top 10 for head coaches. He was just a phenomenal coach with a phenomenal culture set that really raised the floor of this team to a team that just couldn't have a losing season. And that's not hyperbolic, that's actually completely factual. Mike McCarthy comes in and, not for nothing, a great offensive coach. His offenses, all the way back to his time in Green Bay, time in Dallas, those offenses were really good. What the overall team did, though, I can't say that you can argue it was better than what Tomlin's results were at the end of every season. It was just sort of the opposite side of the ball was doing really well. And, you bring in McCarthy to develop a quarterback, the quarterback position that they want to get right. That I think that they established that Tomlin wasn't capable of getting right. He inherited Ben Roethlisberger 2 years into Roethlisberger's career. So he kind of just rode off of that at the quarterback position for a long time, which, that's no fault of his. He had to build up the defenses to support Roethlisberger, which he did very well. But couldn't get the quarterback position right after Roethlisberger, and they bring in a guy who just has a reputation of getting the quarterback position correct. Whether it be with Aaron Rodgers, whether it be developing Dak Prescott further, getting backup quarterbacks to play really well, not really seeing an offensive dip, seeing offenses get better all around, seeing players develop better. And that's what their goal is here. They're really dropping in a great defense for McCarthy. And people talk about, this is why Rodgers came back. And I go back, this is not just to get Rodgers to come back and play for one season. This is to get Rodgers back, but also to develop, Will Howard and Drew Aller, who they drafted this year, trying to find if that's the quarterback of the future and getting a good, well-controlled offense behind them. And the McCarthy offense, he has Brian Angelico as his offensive coordinator. I don't expect all that much out of Angelico in terms of offensive control. It's very much going to be what Mike McCarthy does. And it's like that modern West Coast style, focusing on ball control, pre-snap movement, but it's a pass-first offense. And they love the 3 wide receiver sets, and you saw that in some of the offseason moves that McCarthy made, adding Michael Pittman Jr. in a trade and drafting Jeremy Bernard from Alabama. We're now paired up with DK Metcalf. The 3 of them are going to be key features on this offense. And then you have Darnell Washington and you have Pat Freiermuth, who are going to be rotational tight ends in these formations. He loves to be aggressive, stretching the field. That's really what Rodgers' game was really great at in Green Bay, which was getting that ball down the field to a plethora of different types of wide receivers. Green Bay always had very deep wide receiver rooms that McCarthy and Rodgers really did well getting everyone involved. And I expect to see that strategy invoked here with that deep wide receiver room they're going to be putting out on the field this season. There is going to be a yards after catch emphasis as well, which is why you have someone like a Jeremy Bernard, which is why you have DK Metcalf who can really do it all, and why you also have someone in there like Jaylen Warren out of the backfield who had a really good season last year. Kenneth Gainwell, who left, had a good year also with Rodgers. They replaced him with Rico Dowdle, who's going to be more of a traditional running back in this offense. So there is going to be that ability to run the ball, but they want to be able to basically tire out a defense with speed and yards after catch and stretching the ball down the field, manipulate the zones when facing zone coverage and getting guys in place, getting guys to jump on certain routes just with play design. And then after you've worn out the defense, after you've worn out the pass rushers having to pin their ears back and try and get Rodgers, that's when you bring in Rico Dowdle and he just pounds the ball down your throat. And I believe Dowdle does have time with McCarthy in Dallas. I think at least that 1 year. I could be wrong. I wonder if time kind of morphs into one thing. But I do believe Rico Dowdle, did have some time with Mike McCarthy. There is at least some sort of familiarity there. I do wonder about Brian Angelico's overall influence, though. He doesn't have this experience level. He's sort of dipped his toes into a bunch of different styles of offense, so he is adaptable, at least proven to be so. So we'll see how much rope he ends up getting, how quickly Mike McCarthy starts giving him more responsibilities throughout the year. I think this first year, though, it's very much going to be Mike McCarthy being the main focus on this offense and making sure this offense is up to snuff and up to speed here. Even though I do give it a tier 4 for offensive coaching, because you do kind of stretch your head coach a little thin regardless of who your defensive coordinator is, but he did bring in very experienced defensive coordinator in Patrick Graham, who gets tier 2 defensive coaching. And Patrick Graham always seems to have really good defenses as well, even with lesser talents. And he's got a hell of a lot of talent out here for this team. We're going to see some 4-3 under, maybe some 3-4 multiples. It's going to be a bunch of different fronts that you're going to see because he's got so many different pieces that he can do so many different things with. You look at just the defensive line alone. You got TJ Watt, Nick Herbig, Alex Highsmith, even Jack Sawyer in there as your edge 4. You got a plethora of interior defensive linemen like Cameron Hayward. You got Keanu Benton and Derek Harmon. And there's a lot of bodies here to create a really exciting front and be able to mix and match guys in. Depending on the situation, you're never going to be shorthanded depending on what situation you want to account for and on the defensive side of the ball. They'll start probably with some too high. You bring in Jaquan Brisker, who can play more of a traditional safety role when you want to drop Ramsey down into the slot. Great slot player, great run support player. Really a Swiss Army knife defensive back for Patrick Graham to be able to use. But it's also why you get Jamel Dean also to play that outside corner role with Joey Porter Jr. so you can use Jalen Ramsey in that way more effectively. It'll be a lot of simulated pressure. Very player-centric. There's a lot of, getting a certain player on the field and using that player to his full strengths. Again, going back to Jalen Ramsey and that positional versatility. Situationally, it might be a game where Jalen Ramsey is going to play a lot of safety. It might be a game where you might need a little bit more toughness and run support, so he'll come up and he'll play in the slot a lot more, depending on how deep the opposing team's wide receiver room is, for example. And we'll see Patrick Graham execute that throughout games. And he's also very much a chess player out there more than a checkers player, if that makes sense. He doesn't do like these simplistic, straightforward, predictable schemes during games and during drives. He likes to play and force the offense's hand by almost trying to dictate the pace of the game. Like, if he wants the opposing team to put the ball in the air, he'll present a defense that will make the offense want to throw the football, and then he'll have a design, a zone design, a blitz design that'll counteract that immediately and just force the offense to play into his hand. And that's how he got around with some of those Raider teams, for example, where outside of Max Crosby and maybe one or two other guys, there wasn't a whole lot of talent there, but they actually had some really strong performances on the defensive side of the ball because of that mentality. So it's a lot of experience running both sides of the ball. Some established experience. Mike McCarthy being away from the game, being forced into a true development situation where he was brought in to develop the quarterback, but he's never really had to take a quarterback from the ground up. Like to use a 6th round talent like Will Howard or a day 3 talent like Drew Aller. Despite what I think of him, that's what the league's consensus was. It's a lot different than taking an established, should have probably been the number 1 overall pick, Aaron Rodgers, or an established top-level quarterback like Dak Prescott, and sort of just adding the clay pieces onto him rather than starting with a blank sheet of paper the way that it would be with Will Howard and Drew Aller. How he executes his positional coaches on the offensive side and what kind of culture is Mike McCarthy truly going to establish across the board, and being able to take a roster where the most experienced guys on this team who have been there a long time, they've been doing it one way for so long. And so to change that up here, I wonder how much it'll be embraced by some of these veteran players who have been there a while, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And how quickly Mike McCarthy can get that culture changed without this team taking too many steps back. And how will steps back that I feel like inevitably are going to come, how is that going to be embraced by the front office and the fan base, who is so used to this team at least being competitive every single year and not being a team that is picking in the top 10 in a draft or is struggling, truly struggling out there on the field to get their footing underneath them. Because this is a team that's always, worst case scenario, they're a middle of the pack club. Like, this is a relatively low ranking. This is like the floor of what I think teams would expect, or what this fan base would expect from this team. So there is concern with that. And Mike McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers trying to reignite that 2010, trying to turn the clock back almost 2 decades. Are they going to be able to adapt to where each of the pieces here are at this stage in their careers, and the stage in their lives, and the stage of their coaching and playing careers? And will they just sort of fall into old habits, and are they going to be able to execute in those old habits? Or will going back to those old habits just completely revitalize the career of Aaron Rodgers here right at the end, and make Mike McCarthy this true guru of head coaching? It's a huge question mark, the head coach and the quarterback position. Huge wild cards for what this team is even going to look like come this time next year. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and the thumbs up. That helps out with the algorithms, helps my channel grow, reaches out to more people. Even if you disagree with me, hit the thumbs up button. I really appreciate that. Leave your disagreements in the comment section below. Get some discourse going. And now we're going to get to the player evals, which, when we talk about Aaron Rodgers, this could be the most volatile, controversial grading of them all, but we got to do it. We start with the quarterbacks. So we do get Aaron Rodgers. He comes in, he's the 21st ranked quarterback for me, gets an 80 grade. I don't think that he's nearly as washed as people are trying to say that he is. I think that he still has some really good aspects to his game. I don't think the drop-off is as dramatic as people are saying. And I think having 2 young quarterbacks behind him, it's a really good spot for Rodgers to be, because they're going to watch Rodgers, how he prepares, how he relates to Mike McCarthy's offense. Because if anyone knows the McCarthy offense, it's going to be Aaron Rodgers. So the communication levels he's going to be able to give to these young quarterbacks to allow a true breakout star to happen, it really is a great position for this team to be in. But Rodgers' output last year with Arthur Smith, a much more run-centric offense that used the tight ends and the running backs a lot in the passing game, and wanted to run the ball first. Now we're looking at almost the exact kind of opposite offensive philosophy for Rodgers. So what he did in that offense was he actually put the ball down the field quite a bit. He was 13th in big time throws, and he was 5th in turnover worthy plays. So he wasn't putting the ball in harm's way. Now, some of that was designed with the way Arthur Smith would execute an offensive game plan. So we'll see how much that number goes up, but the big-time throw number is for sure going to be going up in this offense now. So we'll see if Rodgers, who was notorious in his career for being a great deep ball thrower, incredibly accurate at all levels of the field, if that part of his game still truly exists. Because he hasn't really been able to unlock that since leaving Green Bay to go to the Jets, right? It's been 3 years for Aaron Rodgers where it's been an offense where being able to execute deep down the field hasn't really been that much of an option for him. He's had some interesting pieces with the Jets and then last year with DK and everything, but the philosophy of the offense hasn't really been conducive to him being able to be the player that was winning MVPs just a couple years ago. What we're going to get with McCarthy here is a lot more similar to what he had been doing at that time. And that's sort of that through line that was created in Green Bay from McCarthy to LaFleur. But he executed in the short areas. He was 4th out of 25 eligible quarterbacks in that. But that's because that's mostly where they were executing, with Jalen Warren and Kenneth Gainwell and Darnell Washington and Calvin Austin and Then you get to the intermediate and deep level, and he was, on the bottom half, towards the bottom end of the qualifying quarterbacks. I feel like these numbers are almost going to flip this year. I expect him to be much closer to the top 10 in deep ball in the intermediate areas come this time next year, and probably somewhere in the middle for the short areas, because we'll see the high percentage throws just sort of tossed in there to keep the defense trying to keep the safeties closer to the line of scrimmage so they can throw it over the top to the deep threats like DK Metcalf. The pressure faults, he was sort of right in the middle, so he wasn't necessarily holding the ball too long. There was a sort of a mixture of him maybe waiting a beat too long, but also the receivers not really doing their part. The play action game was horrific. He was 25th of 26th off of play action last year, which is a huge reason why this offense didn't execute at a high level the way that they were expecting, and why Arthur Smith is gone. Arthur Smith was a huge part of that, because Arthur Smith's entire offense is predicated on having a strong running game, being able to execute play action off of it. And when you weren't able to do that, it caused huge deficiencies in the offense. And there was just, he faced a lot of pressure. He was sort of just bottom parts of the league in terms of against pressure, against the blitz, even when he was kept clean and not blitzed. And to me, a lot of that is the offensive design that he had to try and use. I don't particularly look at Arthur Smith's style and think high-powered passing offense. It pretty much executed as a passing offense the way you would expect from Arthur Smith. I keep going back to the true test here in a Mike McCarthy offense shows if Rodgers still has it or not. And under no circumstance is Rodgers not playing the full season out and not getting a chance to sort of get back into this rhythm and get some chemistry with these new weapons that he has at the wide receiver position, Pittman and Bernard. Now, Pittman's got a lot of experience, so I think Rodgers will really like that and maybe lean on that. And Pittman kind of has that Allen Lazard thing that Rodgers really likes, so we'll see how he uses these particular wide receivers when he targets them. Because Rodgers is incredibly methodical. He's incredibly well studied more than anything else. That when it comes to if something is happening on the field that's considered a mistake, it's almost never a mental mistake on behalf of Aaron Rodgers. He kind of knows what to expect every single time he's out there. This pre-snap reads are sort of muscle memory at this point. A lot of the deficiencies he's had over the last couple of years has been more of a chemistry issue than anything else. And we saw chemistry issues when Green Bay went to that really, really young wide receiver core with Watson and Romeo Doubs. That first year, there was just a lot of miscues and all that from a lack of experience. Hopefully, the added experience of someone like Pittman and then Metcalf now in the second year, Rodgers will be able to do what he's done best his whole career, which is the pre-snap reads, the pre-snap adjustments, setting up the opposing defense to make a change that will that'll help better execute the original play that was called. All that kind of mind games that Rodgers loved playing with opposing defenses and defensive coordinators. We'll see if he's able to pull that out this upcoming season. I do really love Drew Aller. Don't really spend a lot of time on backup quarterbacks here. They're rather inconsequential for the most part during seasons. But I really like Drew Aller. Mason Rudolph is also here. He's currently listed as the backup. I don't know how long that's going to truly last, especially if you get good performances out of one of these younger quarterbacks during camp. I feel like Drew Aller's position on this team is relatively safe. I think his upside, he's the closest thing to Aaron Rodgers in terms of physical traits, which is why I think him landing here was actually really great for him. I think Mike McCarthy's going to really like working with him. It's just a matter of him getting healthy, because he was really primed to have a great season with Penn State last year before getting injured, and then the whole Penn State situation kind of fell apart in general. So he didn't really get a chance to showcase himself in this final college season the way that people were hoping. But I think seeing a guy like Rodgers and how he works, I think Drew Aller's really going to fit in here quite well. Will Howard, from a previous regime, he's the one that I think is mostly on the bubble here with Mason Rudolph between the two of them. I think that's where more of the competition is for a roster spot. I think worst case scenario, Drew Allard is just your emergency third quarterback, while you get the more experienced Mason Rudolph. But I do think that Mason Rudolph, in terms of a grade, actually grades lower than all three of the quarterbacks, which is why he is not featured here. Why he doesn't get his little photo card up or whatever. But he did come in as a 67 grade for me, slightly lower. And I do think that that's kind of just the quarterback that he is. And I think Will Howard and Drew Allard both have significantly more upside at this point than having Mason Rudolph. You kind of get Mason Rudolph for the floor aspect of things, hoping that he never has to actually play. But if he does, you at least have a veteran out there who knows how to at least execute an NFL offense, unlike these two guys who probably are still, and in Drew Allard's case, no experience. Will Howard's case, very minimal being out there, but has a relationship with Rodgers from the previous regime, so that could also play well into his hand this offseason in the summer. So what we have here is a weapons group that's 11th to 14th. A pretty good group. A nice little veteran group, some different body types, some different speed levels out there, some really good catch radiuses that they have here, but we're going to start with DK Metcalf. His second year with Pittsburgh, his second year with Aaron Rodgers. Last year, 99 targets, 59 catches, 850 yards and 6 touchdowns. Almost 81% of his snaps taken from out wide. Less than 20 from the slot. Didn't take enough in the slot to qualify for a grade here. But I just didn't see, kind of going back, harping back again to the previous offensive regime, it didn't feel like that offense, that the scheme and the week-to-week strategy and the play calling and all that was really conducive for a player like DK Metcalf to have a lot of success. You know, like DK is someone who really does well, you know, in that singled up area. And you saw it like against man coverage. He was 18th. He still did well against zone, 22nd. But usually his big body, his big catch radius, he's, you know, run him down the field, run him on those dig routes, and allow him to use that rare combination of speed and size to his true advantage. I don't think that Arthur Smith really had that in the offense. I think Mike McCarthy comes in here, looks at DK Metcalf, and is just salivating at the things he's going to be able to do with him. So I expect DK Metcalf to get back to the level of production we saw at his peak in Seattle, where he is that 80 catches, over 1,200 yards, near double-digit touchdowns, if not double-digit touchdowns. I expect about a 25% increase in his production overall is definitely on the horizon here, especially because last year he didn't really have a great number 2 opposite of him either that was really capable of doing these high-level things like Calvin Austin and Roman Wilson, who is still on the team. They are these smaller guys, so they didn't really do what DK Metcalf can do. It was really just Darnell Washington, and that's why Darnell Washington got a lot of play, got a lot more reps in the receiving game, because they didn't really have another guy that had that capability that Metcalf has, at least in a similar sense from the body standpoint. But you get Metcalf out there against some of these corners, there isn't a corner that he can't out-muscle. There isn't a corner that he can't out-jump, that he can't out-run. Because, I mean, we've all seen the clip of him just absolutely running down an interception from, like, catching up almost 30 yards from behind. Just an absolute animal with those long strides and the powerful acceleration that he has. And, like, there's nothing that's happened that's made you think that he can't be that, other than just getting dropped into an offensive scheme that didn't work for him. So I want to see how Metcalf responds now from that kind of adversity that he faced last year, where it wasn't something that he was used to and that was typical. Maybe not the greatest thing for the ego either. We know wide receivers have the egos that they have, especially the really good ones. So we'll see how he responds to that. And we'll see how Aaron Rodgers in turn is able to use him in this offense, and how Mike McCarthy has designs played for him. Because one thing that you're going to see from McCarthy is that every single one of these wide receivers is going to have a particular package of plays that are specifically designed for them. We saw that in Green Bay a lot with Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, Devontae, all those guys. We're going to see it again here. And what kind of plays is he going to put together to get DK Metcalf involved? I really like the red zone aspect of what DK could bring with his size and with Rodgers' accuracy, and how they communicate pre-snap, how DK Metcalf dials in pre-snap to work with Aaron Rodgers to make sure that when you have those option situations, what kind of signaling Rodgers picks up on, what kind of Metcalf can pick up on pre-snap as well to assist Rodgers in getting the right pre-snap call made just for them, maybe specifically, identifying when he's hot, and all that requires really complex work throughout the summer. So how DK embraces that along with Aaron Rodgers, I think is going to be really key to them and what their production does. But he does have a good number 2 guy with him now in Michael Pittman Jr. coming over from Indianapolis. And this is the perfect role for Michael Pittman. Like, Michael Pittman was kind of miscast in Indianapolis as being the wide receiver 1 in the offense. A lot of it had to do with them just sort of getting a lot of this bundled wide receiver 2 types in their offense, rather than having like a true alpha number 1 and then a bunch of number 3s and 4s that have to live up to a wide receiver 2 role. It was an interesting strategy. I mean, Pittman was productive, 110 targets, 80 catches, 784 yards and 7 touchdowns. But sort of in the same vein as what you get with DK Metcalf, now you pair them together and they're 2 bigger guys. But Pittman is much more of a traditional bigger body receiver. Like, he's not like DK, who's got this athletic freak profile. But he is going to be somebody who has that contested catch ability, who has the sure hands. He's not going to be a big yards after the catch guy. He's going to be that guy you put down the field in those intermediate areas, in the short to intermediate areas as that contested catch guy, to just maybe get that tough first down, to put the ball in the tight windows and have him bring him down. Let Rodgers use his accuracy. And also to draw some attention away from DK Metcalf. Now I feel like both of them, after last year, we're going to see a lot of attention taken away. And we saw with the outbreak of Alec Pierce last year, as a true deep threat for the Colts, Pittman was able to make up for all those areas in the intermediate and short regions because it was stretching the offense. Now, he's going to have a lot of that available to him this year in this type of offensive scheme, even more so, I would say, stretching the field with DK Metcalf, who adds the size to it that Pierce didn't have for the Colts last year. And now Pittman is now singled up on cornerback 2 without safety help over the top that is required to cover someone like DK Metcalf. So I expect him to eat as well. I don't know that his overall production is going to be higher than what it was, but I think his impact could potentially be a lot more so than what it was last year on a game-to-game basis. 80 catches, 800 yards, 7 touchdowns seems to be the range that I'm expecting him to fall in production-wise. But much more big play situations, big time situations, third down situations. I expect them to scheme him up and almost disguise it as a scheme up for DK Metcalf, for example. That's going to just open up huge opportunities for him in those key situations. So a really great 1-2 punch. And then you throw in Jeremy Bernard from Alabama, who's going to be another little speedy guy out there, but also a really good catch, really good sure hands. And it's all about that variety. And then you mix in Roman Wilson, who can play a little bit of the slot role also. Ben Skoranek, special teams guy, but also a good slot player that Rodgers has a bit of a rapport with from last year. Rodgers loves those little white slot type players anyway, those little tough, hard-nosed guys. They got Caden Wetjen as well, who's sort of falling under the radar here, but with Roman Wilson being from the previous regime and Ben Skoranek sort of being relatively disposable, he might be able to sneak in some reps here. I expect him to get some special teams work for sure. See the tight end position with Darnell Washington and Pat Freiermuth. I expect them to really kind of split the carries here. We saw Rodgers really get a great connection with Darnell Washington last year. I think that was mostly a mix of offensive design and just trying to find somebody reliable that had the big catch radius, and Washington really brought that. And Washington also was on the field quite a bit because of that run-first mentality that Arthur Smith wanted to present. So it'll be interesting to see if Darnell Washington does get the same type of play, where maybe somebody like Pat Freiermuth might suit the offensive scheme and desires a little bit more. I think that's arguable at least. So that's we'll see what ends up happening there. I think both of them can be incredibly productive though, and can serve the same role in this offense relatively well, which is pretty much the third or fourth target in the passing game. Sort of a safety blanket type role. Robert Tonyan, any other time I would not talk about a guy who comes in great as a 60, but man, Robert Tonyan just keeps finding his way into work, and almost no one notices. When I looked at the Steelers depth chart, I was like, is that Robert Tonyan? Man, Aaron Rodgers just finds a way to bring in guys that he likes, doesn't he? He just finds a way to get at least one of his guys in there. And then the running back room, Jaylen Warren, I expect him to eat so many of the passing game reps here. He's a really great receiving back, really good pass blocking pickup. He's a really good outlet guy. He knows when to delay his runs out into the flat, really good in the screen game. Rico Dowdle, not much of a receiving back at all. Like we said there at the top with what I expect Mike McCarthy's overall strategy to be, is a lot of Jaylen Warren when they're spreading it out. Traditional first and second down situations, third down and longs for sure. And then when we get into those like second and short, second and mediums is when we'll see Rico Dowdle. Not to say that they won't throw a screen pass at him, but I don't expect Dowdle to be eating up a whole lot of the receiving the receiving reps here. I expect the offense to be a lot more predictable with Dowdle on the field than it is with Jaylen Warren on the field, which, as we get to the running backs here, they do come in as 19th to 21st, and Dowdle does get a higher grade than Jaylen Warren. But it'll be interesting to see if that is really going to be how the offense executes. Because like I said, a lot more predictable with Rico Dowdle in than with Jaylen Warren, I feel. And I think the offense will have a lot more dynamic capabilities with Jaylen Warren in as compared to Rico Dowdle. But Dowdle last year, he came in, basically just stole the starting spot from Chuba Hubbard, who was coming off of a great year. Carried the ball 230 times for 1,000 yards, had 4.6 yards a carry. He had 10 explosive runs, accounted for 51 first downs. So he was capable of like coming up with some pretty good work for Carolina. And I expect him to face a lot more favorable situations like we discussed earlier with talking about McCarthy's offense. Because I do expect them to do a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, pass the ball around, get some yards after the catch, mix in some screen passes in there, tire out the defensive line and the linebackers, tire out the front 7, and then bring the hammer in here. So I expect him to hover around maybe 220 touches, but it's going to be in very advantageous situations. So his yards per could potentially be over 5 yards coming out, and he could very well be that 1,000-yard rusher with double-digit touchdowns. A player that I look at that had a similar role in an offense for a while there was actually LeGarrette Blount. Now, Blount is a bigger body, a more powerful runner than Dowdle, but I could see the role being incredibly similar. There was that year where LeGarrette Blount had like 18 rushing touchdowns and like all of them were from the 1-yard line, and he came in and he was just the punisher after you saw the offense just wear out the opposing defense, and then they just brought in this monstrosity to finish off drives, to demoralize them further. I could see Rico Dowdle being unloaded in that way. And so he could be I would not be surprised at all if he was like double-digit touchdowns, 1,000 yards, all that. Lots of yards after contact. I expect maybe a little bit more gap runs from him then in those short yardage situations. But I actually have a really high hopes for his quote-unquote fantasy type production and being that touchdown vulture, while Jaylen Warren is I'm going to mix and match everything. We're going to throw it out there. It's going to be an extension of the run game, using the screen game, using the RPO game, all that kind of stuff, because he was very productive as well last year. On, what was it here? 208 carries at 4.5 yards a carry. So they had very similar production in terms of the yards per carry, the opportunities they got, the big time runs. But that doesn't tell the whole story for Jaylen Warren the way that you would, including the passing game here. So he won't get that 200 carries this season. I expect him to maybe have closer to, let's call it 150 carries. But I also expect him to be in like the 50 catch range this season and hovering around double-digit touchdowns also. Because he's going to get those in the receiving game. He's going to be that guy who's going to have those big time plays, the dynamic, fun guy in the offense. He's going to be, keep going back to the LeGarrette Blount comparison that I just gave. Like when you saw what they did with James White and LeGarrette Blount. James White was Mr. Speed, the fun guy, the one that made all the highlight reels, and then Blount was the Punisher, the hammer, the touchdown machine. I expect a very similar dynamic here with this type of offense. Now, Warren gets more production and more playing time because of the pass first policy of Mike McCarthy. So having him out there being able to be a starting caliber actual running back, because he doesn't come in with a low grade here at all. He's a starting caliber running back in terms of just being a straight up hand the ball off to the guy. So he's going to be able to be productive in that, and you're not really losing a whole lot in the run game by having Jaylen Warren out there. The offense is overall probably better off, which is why I say, again, he's going to be the one that's going to get those carries, get those touches. A guy sort of lost in all this is Caleb Johnson, a draft pick last year. People considered him to be the best back in the draft last year. I think the writing might be a little bit on the wall here that Rico Dowdle was brought in at all. And that Eli Heidenreich, one of the funnest draft picks of all time, was brought in as well to sort of be like a mix and match guy out there who's going to be thrown out in so many different scenarios. I think he's going to be one of those fan favorite guys. When he gets on the field, he's going to be the high effort player. But a really good overall weapons group when you consider all things involved here with the running backs and the receivers and the tight ends. There's a whole lot here for Mike McCarthy to work with, a lot for him to sink his teeth into, and a lot of variety of different types of bodies, different types of skill sets. That's going to make this Pittsburgh offense really unpredictable, really diverse, and help Rodgers out week to week. You're going to be able to scheme to your opponent and really take advantage of their weaknesses here, especially with this running back room in particular. If you're facing a team that's a particularly strong front seven, you're going to be able to have Jaylen Warren out there to spread this team out, really take that front seven out of the game with a quick passing game, the screen game, and all that. And then if you have a team that's particularly weaker up the middle, you got Rico Dowdle, who's going to be able to just absolutely punish this opposing team and just really destroy the interior defensive line rotation, the linebacker rotation, and you'll be able to win games like that where a lot of the pressure then is off Aaron Rodgers. They're going to have to stack the boxes on you to compensate for that weakness, and then you throw it over the top to these big catch radiuses, these freak athletes that you have out there, Washington, Metcalf, Pittman, Bernard. A lot of success can come from this diverse group of weapons that they have put together. Now, the one issue with this offense really is going to be the offensive line. There's some good pieces here. There's some unproven pieces here. There's some new shiny toys in here. Looking up, pass blocking, I got them 19th to 22nd. Run blocking, they're 28th to 31st. Just not looking great for that other than their center, Zach Frazier, who we'll get to. But with Broderick Jones kind of seemingly done, got some injuries there. Troy Fountain is currently positioned to move out to left tackle after playing right tackle for a bit here. So all this is how he ranked up against tackles, but playing on the right side. So now he is making that switch over as of right now. They did draft Max Ianacor, who was a right tackle out of Arizona State in the first round. So he seems to have that spot kind of locked in. I don't know if they're going to be looking at switching him over. We'll see how the summer works out. I do expect them to be the two starters when the season begins, however. But Fountain did not do all that bad. 21st in pressures given up, 21st in hurries, 24th in quarterback hits. It's not some high-end tackle play, but not bad on 634 pass snaps. Didn't take a lot of penalties either. So he wasn't particularly grabby and holdy and all that stuff, which if he was maybe a little bit more, maybe he gets away with a couple of things and the pressure hurries and hits actually lower. So maybe that would be a little trick for him moving forward. We'll see how he gets coached into that. Maybe moving to the left side. We'll see a little bit more success for him. But he only gave up 2 sacks also last year. His run blocking was just horrendous. We will say that. He was 35th in zone, and that was 60% of the run snaps. It was out of 54 players, 54 tackles. But he was 53rd of 54 tackles in gap, which was about a third of what they did, just less than a third of what they did in the run game. So we'll see how that balances out with the zone and the gap and how he develops in that, also now being on the left side. Because there is a difference. There is a significant difference from playing left to right. But this is a first-round talent that is going to have to start producing the fruits of his labor. Because we've seen there are 3 first-round tackles on this roster. Fountain, Broderick Jones, and Max Ianacor competing for 2 spots. And Ianacor is probably the safest of them all because he was drafted by this regime. So Fountain is going to have to really perform well here because there's really no ties for him, and rookie contracts are coming up. But when he came out, he had that diversity to his game where there was can he play maybe some guard? He played some tackle. He's pretty much being drafted to be playing in the best position that best suits him and his skill set where he excels the most. And I think that can be a double-edged sword. Because now they're trying him on the left side, and will it be just too late to figure out if he's going to be somebody who may be a better guard or whatnot? I think that from a size profile and his agility and all that, he's definitely got a good tackle foundation. It's just a matter of now you got a more pass-happy offense. Won't face so many big boxes. Maybe a little bit more disciplined. Edge rushing is going to be required here as they try to manipulate the defensive line in the front sevens in their favor. Working on the backside now, it's going to face a different type of edge rusher. So maybe he responds better to that. Maybe, the left hand and the right hand punch coming from the left side work better than coming from the right. Maybe stepping off of that, pushing off of the right foot into your pass pro is better for him, more comfortable for him. We'll see how this all works out. It's all a giant mystery right now, and that's a huge issue with the offensive line is that there is just these giant mysteries across the board from Fountain. Then you got guard Spencer Anderson, currently listed as a starter. Opposite of him, Mason McCormick. But you've also got Brock Hoffman, who I really like. Hoffman's sort of sitting as your backup center, 3rd and 4th interior offensive lineman. So I get that, but a true competition with Spencer Anderson, I think you can yield a better result having Brock Hoffman start instead. Then you got Jennings Dunker, who his versatility, one of my favorite players coming out, ended up in a great spot here. I like him as to compete also for that left guard spot. I think Mason McCormick kind of has the 1 guard spot locked down. He's had some good performances the last couple seasons. Hasn't really excelled into that next tier. But I think from what he did as a rookie, he's been able to at least maintain that, which is a decent performance from week to week. Max Ianacor, of course, drafted here. Coming in with a good foundation for a pass blocker, nothing in terms of run blocking. But when you have an offense that's a majority of what you want to do is that pass first, you're going to prioritize the offensive linemen that have a good passing foundation, pass blocking foundation. And you're not really bothered by low-end run blocking. So there's some interesting depth here between Dunker and Jones. You could mix in any of these guys, really, and I don't think it's going to drastically change the overall offensive line performance all that much. I think you go the most upside offensive line that you could put out there would be having Dunker start over Spencer Anderson, and that being the offensive line you put out if you're looking for just high upside. But I think this is the best floor would be to have Hoffman there at that guard spot. So we'll see how Spencer Anderson is able to perhaps keep what is currently listed as the starting guard position with some really stiff competition coming up his way. Competition brings out the best in people after all. The one thing that really isn't up for debate is Zach Frazier there at center. He's one of the best centers in the league. He came into the league performing at a high level and really did a great job maintaining that. Last year, he only gave up a single sack that he was credited for. Second in pressures allowed out of 32 centers. So only one center was better than him at that. Same thing with Hurry, second. He had 634 pass snaps also, so it wasn't like he was out there, for only half the snaps as the opposing centers in the league. He was 14th in hits given up. So, Rodgers is getting that ball out pretty quick, and those A-gap blitzes were working to a degree for opposing defenses. We'll see how they make up for that. Again, with a different offensive philosophy coming out. And even as a run blocker, he was 11th in zone, 14th in gap. He's just really solid in all aspects of his game. Really well-rounded. Was 8th in penalties out of 32. So not particularly grabby. Really good technique. Really good hands. Really good feet. Really good at pre-snap identifications. Good communication with the offensive lineman opposite him. On either side of him, that is. Really good at, knowing where in pass pro to help out. He was good. He was, again, good at identifying A-gap blitzes and stunts and twists and whatnot. Did kind of fall into an area where it didn't work out all that great, where he maybe shifted to the wrong side or anticipated the one side was going to need the help and not the other, and it kind of left some space there for a blitzer or a stunting defensive lineman. But now with Mike McCarthy there, Mike McCarthy had that Jeff Saturday for a while. So really bestowing that onto a very similar player, this type of offense, I expect Zach Frazier to take maybe another step up here and truly establish himself in that top 5 center conversation, which I think he hovers around it right now. And I think people will argue that he's not there yet. And I think that's fine. But I think from an overall perspective, he's got all the tools and should be solidified in that conversation by the end of the year. But this is kind of like the offensive coaching and the quarterback. This offensive line is going to be a huge deciding factor for how much success this offense really has. Because they got the weapons, in the passing game and the running game at a pretty good spot. But if the offensive line can't get it together with the complete lack of experience that they have, Frazier, McCormick haven't been in the league that long. Fountain hasn't been in the league that long. Iannacore just got here. Broderick Jones has had a couple of years under his belt. Dunker just got here. There's a lot of inexperience on this offensive line. It's a very young offensive line that is going through another offensive regime change, by the way. I think for Zach Frazier, this might be his third offensive coordinator. Because there was Matt Canada, there was Arthur Smith. I don't know if was Frazier on the Matt Canada team. He might have been. Then you had Arthur Smith last year. You have, Mike McCarthy with Angelico coming in this year. So there's a lot of learning a new offense again, sort of starting from scratch going on here, which is really tough on young players, especially when the offensive line philosophy and the calls and the expectations are constantly changing as well. Once you get into a rhythm, then you have to completely change it. So that does affect this group, maybe more than what's given credit for. So overall, it is my 24th ranked offense coming in. 22nd passing offense, 24th rush offense with tier 4 coaching. It's a huge question mark here. Now, it has the potential to be like near a top 10 offense. If they're able to throw it back with Rodgers and McCarthy, sure. If the offensive line is able to get it, sure. But there's just too many question marks surrounding those things to rank them particularly high. Now let's move over to the defensive side of the ball, and probably the best of anyone in the league. In fact, it is the best of the best. It's the defensive line. The absolute best defensive line in the whole league. They're number 1 in pass rush, number 1 in run defense for me. It is just one great player after another after another. The depth is so good. Like, the depth is so phenomenal. But we're going to start here with the edge rushers. And to have 3 really strong edge guys is such an asset here. And it starts with TJ Watt, who people are like, oh, he's on the downturn and he's fallen off and all that, which, sure, maybe. He was graded higher last year, but he's still a great player. And as you work these guys into this defense, he's going to be constantly put into great situations. He's so well-rounded. Like last year, he was 24th in sacks, he's 34th in pressures, 29th in win percentage, 15th in hits. So it was definitely one of his less productive seasons, considering he took 800 snaps, but second in batted balls, 11th in forced fumbles. He was 25th in missed tackle percentage at 63. He was 31st in stops percentage. He's incredibly disciplined off the edge. Has a great amount of pass rush moves. Has really good run defense strategies. Works bull rushes and speed really well. He still has all those features. He's just a little bit older now, right? And as you get a little bit older, your get off might not be just quite what it used to be, which obviously can affect his production, and maybe his production keeps taking a downturn again, or maybe he's just this type of player now, where he's not going to be a double-digit sack guy, but that's okay. Because when you have the defensive coaching that they have right here with Patrick Graham, he's still going to have a spot out there. He's still going to have a place. You're still going to be able to use him. You're going to be able to put him as a true defensive end. You're going to be able to use him as his outside linebacker role. You're going to be able to drop him into coverage. You're going to be able to have him quarterback spy, because he's got the football IQ to be able to execute all those things. But then you have Nick Herbig coming up behind him, who's going to fill in all these gaps for him. Herbig had 8 sacks as well. He was 10th in pass rush win percentage, 15th in hits. So as a pass rusher, he was able to fill in that role really well. So maybe the conversion is, as TJ Watt becomes much more of an early down guy. And then Herbig is the one you bring out to really pin his ears back and go and get the quarterback, because that's a great role for him. And then he ends up slowly developing the run defense there that he just doesn't quite have right now. Still better than a lot of starters in the league. He's definitely the best edge 3 in the entire league right now. The amount of teams he'd be edge 1 on are, half the league at this point. You'd like to see him, be a little bit more of a sure tackler, though. Like, his velocity off the edge and stuff like that has left him vulnerable, where he's done a lot of reaching on the arm tackles and sort of blowing by. The angles haven't been all that great when the player is not completely stagnant, or he doesn't anticipate the step up into the pocket, or he doesn't anticipate the running back move properly. He does end up in a lot of arm tackle situations. So cleaning that aspect up, but that comes also with time as well, and time and experience, and being put into situations where your role isn't just go get the quarterback, where you have to be a little bit more disciplined. And when you have 583 snaps, so many of those are just go get the quarterback, right? But I do like Herbig as a developmental piece to continue to develop. He really came onto the scene strong. So you want to see him continue to build off of that foundation here. And he's got, with TJ Watt there, he's got a great mentorship there to see a guy do things all the right way, be a sure tackler, be disciplined, use his eyes really well, even when engaged in blocking, shed blocking at the right time, shed it in the right direction with anticipation as to what the ball carrier or the quarterback is going to be doing at that time. We've seen Herbig do a great job at that, and I think he'll continue to grow. And then you have Alex Highsmith, who has developed into a really strong edge 2, borderline edge 1. Certainly at the highest end edge 2 that there is. Third best pass rusher out of the 3. What did have more sacks than all of them, but a lot of that was, he was doing some cleanup duty for what was going on around him with Herbig and with Cam Ward in the middle, who we're going to get to. But it was definitely probably his best performance. 4th in stops percentage out of all edge players. That run defense that he brings is so strong. And being able to have him out there as a 3-down all-purpose edge player who can produce as a pass rusher still with the best of them, but has such a great foundation for run defense as well, that makes him a great weapon for a defensive coordinator. So getting him more snaps, more situational. Maybe I would maybe anticipate his snap count and TJ Watt's snap count from last year maybe flipping this year, and him being the number 1 edge guy, taking up that mantle. I think the time is now for that, because you're not losing a whole lot in pass rush capabilities. It's not this significant drop off, especially if you feel like TJ Watt is trending downward and Alex Highsmith is trending upward. How much more upward, I don't know. He's already got a tremendous skill set. My God. How can you reasonably expect better out of him? It's hard to say. He's so strong at the point of attack. He has sneaky speed to him, really good hand movement, sheds blocks so well, can work on both sides of the field. We've seen him do some great things off the right side, great things off the back side. Working against the best tackles in the league and still having success. There's just a lot to really like about what he brings. And having these 3 guys at your disposal, it helps keep everyone fresh. It helps keep everyone playing in the best situation possible for them to have success. And you throw in Jack Sawyer, who I think a lot of people forget about, as this edge 4. I expect him to get some snap count this year also. Let him develop a little bit, because you did get him underneath in the last draft in like the 4th round for that reason. I think you'll see him get a little bit more playing time. He's going to be another great piece to this edge rush that's going to be sneaky good in run defense in particular. Then you move to what you have on the interior, and you have 4 legit starting caliber interior defensive linemen to just be rotating in and out. It starts with Cam Hayward, who the last 2 years has had like this late career renaissance where he somehow got himself to even the next level. Like, he's always been one of the best interior defensive linemen. Then he started to look like he was aging out. And then all of a sudden, 2 years ago, it was like, bam, right back on the scene. And you go, okay, can he really follow it up? And bam, he follows it up again. He was the best run defending interior defensive lineman last year, for sure. And one of the best, like top 5 in terms of pass rush from the interior as well. 820 snaps at this stage in his career. Just phenomenal. He had 4 sacks, which was 21st out of 58 interior defensive linemen, which, you go, okay, whatever. 9th in overall pressures, 4th in pass rush win percentage, 2nd in quarterback hurries. So he was an absolute menace that was creating all these opportunities for the edge rushers, for the other interior defensive linemen, for the secondary to just execute on their end, allowing the secondary, collapsing pockets opens up huge opportunities for your secondary to play more instinctive, to play more aggressive on, to really crash down on certain routes because that ball's coming out. Then he was 2nd in missed tackle percentage. So when he got his hands on people, they weren't going anywhere. He was 5th in forced fumbles, 4th in batted balls, 6th in stops percentage. The only thing he didn't do well was he was playing so aggressive in all aspects of the game that he was taking a lot of penalties. He was 75th in penalties taken. But the ability to move him around on the entire defensive line as well with the B gap, 415 snaps from the B gap, 334 snaps from the 4 tech. Being able to use him in that way, stacking certain sides of the defensive line, stacking on top of a tackle, forcing the tackle to make decisions. It opens up so many opportunities, and he's playing at such a high level still, playing with athleticism and the mental aspect still. You can't dismiss the athletic profile that he's still playing with. It's absolutely amazing to see Cam Hayward still playing at this high level. And then you have the guys around him that are going to be situationally deployed with him. In these pass rush situations, you're going to see Keanu Benton get deployed here next to him. There's a real world where it's 5 down linemen with the dime linebacker type, and then the defensive backs, where you have Hayward, Benton, Smith, Herbig, and Watt all on the field at the same time, just making the quarterback's life a living hell. And being able to line those guys up across the entire defensive line is such an advantage for Patrick Graham to have. Keeps things exotic. And then if you want to come in more, hard-nosed situations, true running situations, you got Sebastian Joseph Day, who's still one of the best run-defending interior defensive linemen in the league. Absolutely still one of the best. Understands space eating and gap protection and gap discipline so well. Watching him and Cam Hayward out there together in run defense situations, good luck getting past those two guys in the A and the B gap this year. You even mix in Derek Harmon, last year's first-round pick, who's going to get sprinkled in all situations. I really feel like Derek Harmon is the ultimate understudy for Cam Hayward because he does have great balance to his game. It's just a plant that needs to be watered at this point. So I like to see him as that understudy learning from Cam Hayward. And then when Cam Hayward is ready to hang him up, you get a nice smooth transition with Derek Harmon, who I think will mostly be deployed. He'll probably be the third most deployed interior defensive lineman because I do think Benton's going to see most of his work come in passing situations. I think Joseph Day is going to get much of those obvious running situations. And then Harmon's going to get that mixture. And then whatever he most excels at is where his snap count's really going to live as the season goes on. But where's the weakness? Where's the weakness here? A traditional front four, no matter how you mix and match these guys, there's still, where's the downside? I guess you can say the downside is in the age of TJ Watt and Cam Hayward, who are still playing at really, really high levels. Like Hayward does not look like he's on the downturn. Like Watt, you maybe argue Watt is. But even if Watt just takes like a 10% drop in ability this year, he's still one of the better edge guys in the league. And then if he's taking that 10% drop off, you're kind of expecting Herbig or Jack Sawyer or something to pick up that 10% of development themselves in a positive direction. So where are you losing the overall impact? It's such a great job building this defense. Like, credit to Tomlin, who left them with this to work with. Because if there's one thing about a defense that you want, it's a strong defensive line working in the trenches, being able to rush the passer and stop the run. And there's no one that does it better than the Pittsburgh Steelers, on paper at least this season. And you move to the linebackers, and it's kind of the exact opposite of what we just talked about, isn't it? Not a lot of high-end talent, not a lot of depth. They come in 21st to 22nd in pass coverage and 30th to 32nd in run defense. I don't hate Peyton Wilson as a linebacker. I think that he's solid in coverage. He's exactly what you want a cover linebacker to be. But just not great in run defense. And then you look at Patrick Queen, who, might be the most overrated player in the league, at least by a fan base. Because they talk about Patrick Queen like he's just like, oh, mwah, chef's kiss. And for me, I'm just like, oh boy, more like a balloon knot. More like a balloon knot kiss. Just he had 80 tackles last year. He was dead last in missed tackle percentage. Among 59 linebackers qualifying, he was 59th. Which, not good. Not good for a starting linebacker. Stops percentage, out of 90 linebackers, he was 72nd. So, very much on the bottom end here. Completion percentage, he was 22nd. He was targeted 90 times in the passing game, so he was out there a lot. He was definitely out there a lot. But he gave up 71 catches. That was 22nd of 52 linebackers, 814 yards. For passer rating, he was 43rd out of 52. 37th in man coverage, 35th in zone coverage. So that's like bottom end of the league. Linebacker 2 production at best. Gave up 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. 43rd of 52 in pass breakups. So it just wasn't a productive season for Patrick Queen. To be quite honest, outside of that 1 year with Baltimore, Patrick Queen hasn't been very productive in the NFL. He's kind of just been like a low-end linebacker too, for the most part. Which there's a role for him in the league, but it seems like Pittsburgh sort of has built the linebacking group around him. It'll be interesting to see how the new regime handles this. Because they didn't exactly go out there to get new linebackers here. It's Malik Harrison, who's like a linebacker edge kind of hybrid guy, going to be a blitzer for you. And then Cole Holcomb, who's got some injury history and maybe at his best could be the best linebacker on the team, but like you sort of are going to be handing off a lot of the reps here to Queen and Wilson. There's a lot more investment in them than Cole Holcomb. But this definitely is the one part of the defense where you go, this is where the improvement is needed the most. Because especially if Peyton Wilson is not on the field, you don't have any type of cover linebacker ability out there. Now, I think what helps is that the defensive line is so strong. So if you really simplify the linebacker's role, especially in the run game, and make it just solely gap discipline, then I think you can at least have a productive season, a productive front seven that's going to be, again, drastically carried by what you have in the front four. But I think that you can get these linebackers to play at least disciplined football enough where they won't be as much of a detriment to your defense as it would in another situation. For example, like if you had a middle of the pack defensive line, then I think having this type of linebacker group that is so incredibly weak in run defense would be a huge red flag. Because so much of what the linebackers do in a defense is based around how they defend the run more than anything else. Even in a more passing league, you can get away with having a linebacker who's not a great cover guy as long as he just plays a disciplined zone and sort of eats up the middle of the field a little bit, keeps everything in front of him. You can get away with that a lot more than you can get away with a linebacker who can't defend the run, who can't tackle, like Patrick Queen. Where it's like that's the number one role of a linebacker is like, can you tackle? And he can't. So we'll see how if any improvements can be made. If they can scheme them into better scenarios here, into better situations to maybe outperform these grades. But it is not looking up for this group. There isn't really any sign of an upside here. Maybe outside of Peyton Wilson developing some sort of ability in run defense. And I think that'll just come with the fact he'll get a lot of opportunities. But is Patrick Queen, are they going to look at Patrick Queen and be like, there's no way he's going to be as bad as he was last year, so let's just ride this train? I could see that being an argument as well. So I would have loved to see them have added a linebacker from this last draft. There's a lot of teams I've said that about so far in this series that have really, really poor linebacking groups that had opportunities to add a really solid young piece to their group, and they just didn't for whatever reason. I think the Steelers pop out immediately as one of those teams. Now we're getting into the defensive backs here, and what a group that they have. They're 7th to 9th in coverage, a tier 2 run defense. One of the better defensive back groups in the entire league. Very similar build to what they have with the front four. But we'll start with their big free agency signing in the offseason. That is Jamel Dean, coming off of back-to-back just phenomenal seasons for him. Amazing performances. And last year was just a great job from him. He was the 5th graded man corner, 6th graded zone. He was 3rd in completion percentage allowed out of 74 corners. He was 4th in touchdowns allowed, which is 1. He had 3 interceptions. That was good for 9th out of all corners. He only had 1 pass breakup, which was just odd. But he was such a lockdown guy. He was number 1 out of all eligible corners in passer rating allowed when targeted. So he was just completely on top of his game, entering that true top tier cornerback group, elite cornerback play. He played with great speed, great instincts. Again, his versatility in man and zone is just really, it's an unfounded skill at this point. There's very few guys that do both really well. Usually they're a specialist in one of those things, and the defense coordinator just keeps putting them in those scenarios and uses disguise and whatnot to get them to perform better in whichever one they don't excel at. But, I mean, he was targeted 54 times, only gave up 25 catches, 311 yards. Like, that is just, like, talk about a great performance. And him coming to this team, I can't believe that he wasn't significantly more sought after in free agency, that he didn't completely break the bank with one of these rosters. But coming to Pittsburgh, it was clearly a thing where it's like, I'm coming here to win. And then you pair him up to Joey Porter Jr., who has just been on a steady rise as well. You know, last year, again, his best year last season. Gave up 0 touchdowns, had 11 pass breakups, was 3rd and 4th in completion percentage, 5th in completion percentage allowed, and number 2 in passer rating allowed when targeted. So they come into this league with last year's number 1 and number 2 corners in terms of passer rating allowed. So needless to say, arguably the best 1-2 punch coming into this year. Now there is more established high-end players at this position that have been doing it a little bit longer at a high level that you'll probably put a little bit more trust into. But if Porter comes in anywhere close to this type of performance again next year, he's going to be entering that conversation for top-level corners as well. Right now, he's got that high-end number 2, sort of low to middle number 1 in terms of reliability, I would say. But it's been one good year after another from him that another one like that, he's going to be in that top tier. And I'll be putting him in that top tier if that happens. Just like, again, 2 really strong outside corners. He was 10th in man coverage, 22nd in zone coverage. So the zone can improve. He can improve in zone. But in terms of just lock up man coverage, fantastic. And again, 7th in pass breakups. He had 11 PBUs last year. That's a hell of a number. Gave up less than 300 yards. In fact, gave up 10 yards a catch, really, which is a really good number. That's keeping everything in front of you. Usually you'll see that number be a little bit more than 10 with the way the passing is in the NFL this year or the last couple of years. He did take 9 penalties also. So that is a bit of a knock on him as well. But that comes with being a really strong man cover guy. Is at times, you get in that press man situation. You get a little handsy. You get a little grabby sometimes. Because maybe at times you're maybe too aggressive at the point of attack and you lose the footing and your footwork gets a little sloppy. So I do ding him a little bit for that. But it also comes with time, right? That comes with time and experience, and soon he'll be a little bit more, methodical with when he does those things. And I think that's going to continue the upward trend for him in terms of where he ranks among NFL corners. But in terms of a 1-2 punch coming into the year, it's hard to find much better than what they have with Porter and Jamel Dean. Then you got Brandon Echols, who sort of sneaks his way in there, a decent little, cornerback 3, slot player. Under the radar completely is Asante Samuel Jr., who came to this team late in the process last year after sitting in free agency for a long time there. Had some injury concerns that held off on teams bringing him in. But a sneaky, sneaky guy to have out there, brother. He was a really solid corner for the Chargers there. So we'll see how he mixes in here now, hopefully at 100%. And then they also drafted Dalen Everett out of Georgia, who comes in pretty damn good corner to come in here. And he's going to be sitting there as like corner 5, corner 6 on this roster, depending on what they're going to do with Jalen Ramsey, who comes in as a cornerback / safety for me. Because he's going to play situationally according to what Patrick Graham needs that particular week. So last year he had 353 snaps in the slot. He had 157 snaps at corner, outside corner, 157 snaps as a box safety, and 419 snaps as a traditional free safety. This was really the first year of his career where this truly happened. When he came over from Miami, there was the whole, what is he going to play? Is he going to be mostly a slot guy? Is he mostly a safety or whatever? And basically what they did last year is I think what they're going to do again this year is wherever the strong point of the offense was, he played the position to try and take that away. So that's why you'll see him, why he ranked 33rd in terms of playing in the slot and 62nd in terms of passer rating given up, why he allowed 6 touchdowns. It's because he was constantly being put into a different situation, it felt like every single week, and it all revolved around who the best player on the opposing offense was. So if you're out there and you're playing Baltimore, for example, he's going to be out there playing some box safety that week to shore up, because he is such a great run defender. He gets that A grade in run defense support. If you're playing a team that has a particularly strong slot player, like talk about Seattle, for example, with JSN, who can play sort of inside out, you're going to see him come up. He's going to play some slot. When JSN slides into the slot, he's going to be the guy that's going to come up and play that slot role. Or if you have a team that particularly loves to stretch the ball down the field, he's going to be that back there playing the free safety role. So we're roaming from side to side, reading the quarterback and attacking that deep part of the field that the offense is trying to execute in. So what that does lead to is the statistical output does suffer because of that. Rather than him just playing in the slot 90% of the time, well, he's going to play against teams that don't have a particularly strong slot player. So he'll dominate that guy. But his role now is to counteract the best part of the opposing offense, the opposing team. So I do expect this sort of statistical output to maybe maintain itself here. Because giving up a bunch of touchdowns, sure, because he's mostly against the team's best player, but he's also got 6 pass breakups. Because he's still really good at the point of attack. He's still really good at ball location. The ball skills are still all there. 33rd in the slot, but he's, again, constantly playing against a guy who is really, really good at being a slot receiver. He's not playing against a bunch of bums in the slot. So we'll see how that continues, how he builds on that, but I do expect him to still be an impact guy in that sense. And as he ages, the athleticism kind of goes. Maybe he does settle into much more of a true safety role. But I expect this season the snap count to look a whole lot similar to what we saw last year. Maybe the outside corner snaps are not as high. Maybe you lose about half of those outside corner snaps and they go to the safety snaps or the box safety snaps. but he's such an all-around weapon. But it is, again, also the story of what you get from this defense, which is Cam Hayward up front, TJ Watt up front, Jalen Ramsey there, older players who have played at significantly high levels, who maybe you're anticipating the downfall of at some point in time. So how do you use them? And that's why with Jalen Ramsey, you do bring in Jamel Dean. You do have Asante Samuel Jr. You do get Dalen Everett. Because if you can't play him at corner, you want to have that corner position sort of solved and figured out, and that's what they did. They added enough depth there. And then you say the same thing with the safety room. Well, if he's going to play safety, if he's going to drop from the safety role to the corner role, how do you make up the safety position? You do that with Deshaun Elliott, who's been there for a bit. You bring in Jaquan Brisker. You bring in Darnell Savage. And you draft Robert Spears-Jennings, who has really good run defense capabilities. Darnell Savage, a little bit more of a cover guy, a little bit more of a slot guy. Jaquan Brisker got some safety potential there, some back-end safety work there. Deshaun Elliott, sort of a mix and match box safety, free safety, hybrid guy. So you have, again, much like what you did with the front four, on the back end here, you've done very similar things. You've sort of got all your bases covered, all the diverse pieces in there, all the right depth pieces in there to be able to mix and match guys according to what is best for that particular week. And mixing those two things together, you're going to get high-level defensive performances in every aspect here, making things a lot easier for the offense. And this is where you're going to get your turnovers on the outside, playing aggressive on the outside with Dean and Porter, playing aggressive at the hashes with Ramsey and Deshaun Elliott. It's going to be a hell of a show to see if they can stay healthy and if the defensive scheme can be applied properly to them, of course. So overall, they are my number 4 defense in the league here. Number 2 pass defense, number 7 run defense with tier 2 defensive coaching. Full disclosure, if Mike Tomlin was still here, it would be a tier 1 defensive coaching. They'd probably be the number 1 defense in the league. But there is a little bit of a with Patrick Graham, and with a little bit of the on the aging aspect of this defense that does sort of just a little bit back. The linebackers play a huge role also in the run defense number. So if they get really good run defending out of their linebacking group, this very well could be the number one defense, in the entire league. Moving on to their schedule here, they do have the 19th strength of schedule, a .495 strength of schedule here. The Vegas over-under for them is 8.5 wins, and I'm betting the push on here. Just looking at their schedule, the games against Cleveland, I think, Cleveland's just not going to be good this year at all. I think those are wins. They get New Orleans at home. They get Carolina at home. I think that's really positive for them. And then they're at Tennessee towards the end of the year. I think their defense is just too strong to match up really well against Tennessee. Personally, I don't think they're all that ready to play and compete against Baltimore, though. I think Baltimore is still a good 2 tiers ahead of them. Denver, same sort of thing. They're at Philly and at New England, which is just not a good draw. At Jacksonville, not the best draw. At Tampa, not the best draw. My best case scenario for them is that they're 12-5. Because they do have that upside to them. From the defensive perspective, from the McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers relationship and their production perspective, they could get that. Worst case scenario, though, they're 5-12. That's the offense being just kind of the defensive, some of the older players on the defense that you're expecting some heavy impact from don't really provide it. Jamel Dean doesn't really live up to the hype there. The linebacking group really struggles the way you anticipate. 5-12 is really the floor for them here. From my prediction standpoint, what I can call, I got them at 8-9. 5 wins there, and then, Cincinnati, split the season series with Cincinnati. Maybe you take the games against Atlanta week 1 while they figure out the quarterback situation, maybe. I think that could maybe lean more towards a win for them because of that scenario. They got things a lot more figured out than Atlanta, I think, is going to have figured out week 1. But you don't really know what the Colts are going to be. You don't really know what Jacksonville's going to be, especially that late in the year as they sort of get time to meld things together. Houston at that stage, Houston's got a really strong defense, so if your offense hasn't really figured it out, it becomes a defensive battle that you may not be able to compete with them. And then there's at Tampa, what's Baker Mayfield looking like here? Was Baker Mayfield truly on the downtrend, or was he just playing injured so the team really underperformed? So you don't really know. That's kind of a mystery on its own as well. Getting the bye week right smack dab in the middle, I would have liked if this team got the bye week maybe a little bit later. I think it would have worked out better for them. So I do think 8-9 is my math. I am predicting their first losing season in like 20 plus years. But it is very much a building block season, and I just not as much faith as I would hope that they're going to be able to just be like this playoff team as per usual. So overall, they are my 18th ranked team with the 25th head coach, 24th overall offense, and the number 4 total defense. It's an interesting season. A lot of wild cards. A lot of wild cards on aging players, I will say. And there it is, my number 18 team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Can they continue the streak of winning seasons without Mike Tomlin, with Mike McCarthy now in play? Can they get what they want out of this Mike McCarthy hire, which is a much more high-powered offense? We'll see how this season turns out. And subscribe to the channel, hit the thumbs up, and I will see you guys with the next video next time.